One of the best tournaments are about to start in college basketball, and that's the Shriners Charleston Classic. It's going to be a great showdown between 8 fantastic teams. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Slasher U. I'm your host, Christian Rao, here with my good old co-host, Steve Feck, and we're going to break down this tournament in Charleston. This is one of our favorite ones throughout the season. Steve, I know you are really excited about this tournament.
I am, because historically, there's always one team that it kind of emerges out of this tournament that people really hadn't been paying attention to. And I don't want to reveal my pick of that yet, but and also there's some pretty good, I guess you would call, upsets historically in this tournament, but there's always a nice, great, solid field of 8. Even the consolation games are fun to watch. So I am ready. I already have all of my beverages and snacks ready to sit down and watch these games pretty much from late morning all the way down through the evening. So I'm pretty pumped up.
My favorite part about this tournament is that you have 8 teams, 8 different conferences. And that is what makes it exciting for me. It might not be the top teams that you're paying attention to, a day in and day out. There's none that are in the top 25. Doesn't mean you're not going to get good basketball. You're going to get some very good basketball in this invitational, in this tournament, if you will. And let's break down these 4 games. We're going to start off, and the way that we're going to do these games is from the tip-off time, the earliest one, to the latest one. So we're going to start off with the 11:30 tip-off Eastern time, 11:30 Eastern time. Penn State's going to take on Furman, and both these teams are undefeated. Penn State 3-0. We see Furman at 2-0. This is going to be a really good matchup. We see Jalen Pickett leading the squad for the Nittany Lions, and he has looked very good in the first 3 outings for Penn State, averaging just under 15 points per game. He is perfect so far from the free-throw line. His field goal percentage is just under 45%, doing a very good job for that Penn State squad. This is a team that, first, if you've listened to our show throughout the college basketball season so far, we've talked about how deep the Big Ten is going to be. And I mean, when you looked at our predictions, we were completely we were so off between each other. Like, I think you had Iowa in first place. I had them in 5th.
Yeah.
Like, it's just such a deep conference. And Penn State's going to be one of those teams I think are going to be on the bubble in this conference. And we're going to really see them shine, I think, in this tournament. But they have a tough matchup in round 1, Steve.
They do. Furman was 1 second away from an NCAA berth last March. They lost to Chattanooga, in overtime. Their 2 fifth-year seniors, Mike Bothwell and Jalen Slauson, I think they're using that moment to motivate their teammates this year. The Paladins have lived and died by the three-pointer, and Bothwell's continued to fire early and often there for Furman. He put up 25 against Belmont. And Belmont's a sneaky team. They're not going to necessarily be a tournament team, but they're going to be a tough matchup all year. He's averaging 20.5 points over the first 2 games. Slauson is really looked towards for rebounding. He's an elite defender. He was an all-Southern Conference defensive player last year. But his long-range shot has improved as well, and he's been able to mark up some threes, as has Marcus Foster. They need to control the perimeter, because Penn State's defense, that's what is going to make and break Penn State. Can they shut down some of the higher octane teams in the Big Ten? If they do, they're getting pretty consistent scoring so far. I want to say, I think there's 5 guys that are averaging in double figures for them. You have Pickett, you have Cameron Winter, Andrew Funk. I love watching Miles Dredd play, Seth Lundy. And Pickett put up a triple-double against Butler in the Gavitt Tip-Off Classic. So, and they're shooting like 47.8% beyond the arc. That surprised me. I know they were pretty good on the perimeter, but from three-point land, I didn't think they were that good. So, yeah, this is going to be a really interesting match. I would imagine that Furman is going to try to go out early, try to hit some threes, and then force Penn State maybe to I don't want to see be more aggressive offensively, but perhaps not let Penn State get into a penetrating game and see if they can keep Penn State on the perimeter. Mm-hmm. But as an opening game for this tournament, I can't think of a better opening game with this 8 field, because it's going to really kind of get the fans there and get the fans at home into it, because you're going to see two very distinctive approaches to the game. But if Penn State's defense can shut down Furman's perimeter game, I think Penn State can move on to the next round.
Yeah, the perimeter game is going to be huge for Penn State to stop. Just like you said, Bothwell averaging over 20 points a game. I will say, though, not only does Penn State have to worry about the perimeter game, they have to worry about, getting the rebounds. In the Belmont game, Furman out rebounded Belmont by 20, 44-24. And this is something that they have looked really good at. They have two players, Hine and Slauson, averaging each over about 7 rebounds per game. That is awesome. That is exactly what you need for your forwards, especially if you have some perimeter guards making some nice shooting. This is a well-rounded team that we are really not many people are talking about, and it's because they sit in the Southern Conference. We're going to hear about Thurman a lot more this year. I think this is a team that, just like you said, was 1 second away, 1 shot away from losing to Chattanooga in to make it to the March Madness tournament last year. This could be one that is right on the bubble again to make their way into another, to get that bid for the Southern Conference, if you will. I'm looking forward to this first matchup. It's going to be a really good way to start this tournament. I'm going to lean towards the upset right off the bat and say Thurman wins this game. What do you think?
I wouldn't say you would be wrong on that. I mean, I guess I'm placing more faith in Penn State's defensive prowess, but Slauson, he controls the boards defensively and offensively, and that could, even if their long range shooting's off a little bit, if Slauson can control the offensive boards, I think that can offset that a little bit. And so I would not be shocked. Again, we always say never bet basketball, especially college basketball, because there's so many dynamics there that make the games more competitive. But if I was a betting man, I would say don't bet on anything at all, unless you want to bet some kind of exotic bet, like who's going to hit the first basket or whatever.
Right.
Just stay away. Just stay away from betting as a rule. Don't ruin what's going to be a terrific tournament by, oh my God, I bet the over or whatever it would be. Just focus on the game. There's plenty to watch in this game, and I cannot wait for the 11:30 tip-off.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Pickett's a fantastic player. He's also leading the team in rebounds as well. That makes me a little concerned when I look at that stat about how Furman won the rebounding game by 20. Pickett plays a lot of guard play. So if he's leading the team in rebounds, makes you wonder if they're going to have a hard time keeping up on the offensive and defensive glass when they're playing this Furman team. This is going to be the first game of the tournament. 11:30 is the tip-off time on Thursday. Going to be a fantastic outing. Make sure you check that one out. All right, let's get to the next game on the slate here. And this one is one that, I'm paying attention to. There's no doubt about that. This is Virginia Tech and Old Dominion. If you know anything about myself watching this show, I am a graduate from Old Dominion. I do pay attention to the Monarchs pretty closely, if you will. I am a monarchist, if you want to call me that. That is fine. No problem at all. Great podcast, by the way, for the ODU fans out there, is the Monarchs podcast. Regardless, they have not looked that great so far this season. They've had a couple decent wins, but they have a heartbreaking loss to Drexel. They are 2-1, and they are going to face a Virginia Tech team who I think is absolutely lights out, especially from that 3-point line. What they did to Delaware State to start off the season was unreal from Grant Bazile. It was just unreal. His shot just seemed like you just couldn't miss. And then they completely just did it all over again against Lehigh, and then looked pretty good against William & Mary as well. I would love to say that this is going to be their toughest test against Old Dominion. I think that it could very well be. I think William & Mary and Old Dominion are probably pretty closely as competitors this year. As much as I would love to say the Monarchs have a chance in this one, it's college basketball. There's always a chance. But if Virginia Tech gets that shooting going again, like we saw in Delaware State and against Lehigh, Old Dominion's in trouble.
And then Virginia Tech's coach Mike Young thinks that this team has a chance to match what they did last year in the ACC tournament.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody thought they were pretty much written off early in the ACC conference play, but they just got better as the year went on. The backcourt That's right. It's time for that statement, Slasher U fans. Time to say guard play, guard play, guard play.
There it is.
The Hokies backcourt can flat out shoot the ball.
Yes.
Hunter Couture, Sean Padula, they each registered 22 points and were a combined 10 for 17 from three-point land against William and Mary. Maddox had 2 threes and 14 points. And you mentioned Grant Basile, he transferred in from Wright State. And man, that's
Great
another
transfer.
kid. Yeah, and that's an outside touch really from the forward line. So that's a nice little dynamic there for Young and Virginia Tech. I think Virginia Tech is deeper this year. I think they were able to bring in a halfway decent recruiting class. You had Basile through the transfer portal. I think they're a little more athletic off the bench as well. So that's going to bode well in ACC play, wearing players down. But ODU, I was leaving all the scouting for ODU to you because, we don't always get a chance to boost. It's kind of unfair because even though I was accepted at Gonzaga, I never got to attend for family reasons. So it's kind of unfair of me to say I'm an alum of, because I'm not an alum, but I follow Gonzaga. My college, Point Park University here in Pittsburgh, it's an NAIA school. Now they go to the national tournament pretty regularly, but totally different brand of basketball, NAIA, as opposed to the NCAA. So I'm glad you got your plug in for ODU. If Virginia Tech comes out firing right away, as I'd imagine that they will, I think they can put a nice, comfortable cushion between themselves and Old Dominion, and that would allow them to maybe in the second half get some of those younger players into the rotation, give them some more meaningful minutes. I'm not writing off ODU by any means. They played Drexel is always tough. Drexel's one of those teams that are like mega defensive minded, and that can really throw you off your game. So losing that game to Drexel, I don't know, is a terrible thing. It could be a learning experience for them, but I think I'm going Virginia Tech in this game. In fact, I think Virginia Tech can go a long way in this tournament.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. One last part about the Monarchs, I'd be a fool not to bring them up as we're covering them for really the first time this season on this show. Ben Staley coming over from Hampton and then from Xavier as well, 5th-year senior for Old Dominion. He is the leader of this squad. When you do watch this game, you're going to see that. You're not going to need my words for that one. You're going to be able to see that right away. He's leading in scoring, and you can completely tell why. Fantastic. And they do have some pretty good rebounders on that team as well. 2 of them that are pretty close to averaging 10 per game. That could help if the board game comes into play, but rebounds aren't there if Virginia Tech's not missing any shots, and they are almost 50% from the 3-point line so far this season. It's absolutely unreal. I'm with you. I think the Hokies, Old Dominion got the Hokies in football this year. I think the Hokies get us back in college basketball in the Shriner Classic. So that game is going to be at 2:00. That's the second game on the slate in the Shriners Children's Charleston Classic. That should be a good one as well. Moving on to the third game. And I think this is going to be, again, all these games are fantastic throughout the entire Shriners Classic. But moving on to the third game, this one's at 5:00. The spread's even on this one. I think that one's pretty cool. Colorado State taking on South Carolina. Another 2 teams of unbeaten. We got 3-0 Colorado State taking on 2-0 South Carolina. This should be a really fun matchup. You got obviously an SEC team in South Carolina taking on the Mountain West of Colorado State. The Mountain West, it seems like we are going to have a tougher conference than we thought, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, right, because when we were going through the previews and we were like, do we want to do the Mountain West? And we're saying, well, it's really a one-team conference. Yeah. So far, it's proven to be just the opposite. I said at the outset that there's always one team that kind of like explodes onto the scene out of this tournament, and Colorado State, I honestly believe, is going to be that team. Again, they come in 3-0. They blew out Weber State. They had runs of 15-1 and 18-3 in the first half of that game.
Wow.
But it was their defensive play that was probably more impressive. They held Weber State to 20% from the field and only gave up 15 points, forcing 9 turnovers. I did watch the first half of that game, and it was so one-sided, and Colorado State was so dominating. As much as I wanted to watch, the train wreck that was going to happen in the second half, I went on to another game because it was obvious. And I remember, it's funny you talked about the Mountain West, because when I was watching this game, I remember conversations we were having about, it's a one-team conference.
Right.
I don't know, and there was some favorable write-ups on Colorado State, in a lot of the periodicals, a lot of the online sites.
Mm-hmm.
But what they've done so far, it's just unbelievable. They've got 8 of their players are averaging 10 minutes or more. The scoring load has been kind of shared rather evenly. It seems like one game it's John Tanya, or it's Isaiah Rivera.
It's a great problem to have.
Yeah, Bartrick Cut. Yeah. And the Rams love to run the ball up and down the court. They love that fast pace offense, and they will press both at the half court and the full court, and they'll do it almost, it seems, randomly throughout the game. So that'll be interesting to see how South Carolina responds to that. What's your outlook on South Carolina?
Yeah, South Carolina is a team that you look at their wins, and they're both, cardiac wins, if you will. A 3-point win against South Carolina State, a 2-point victory against Clemson. Now, that's a good rivalry. We know that, and we're about to see that in the women's side coming up this week with South Carolina and Clemson. Clemson on the men's side was a one shot away from beating Virginia Tech in the ACC championship game, not championship game, in the ACC tournament. So, that ACC tournament could have looked a lot different if it wasn't for that Clemson missing that shot. That's a good team. South Carolina, though, when you look at this squad, they have 4 players that are averaging over double digits in the first 2 games. Yep. And you got a tie for first with Brown and Jackson at 15 points per game, Wright's at 12, and you got Carter Jr. at 10.5. So you talk about distributing the basketball, they're doing the exact same thing as well. Looks like that's a blueprint for success early in the season, which is a fantastic thing to see. When I look at this team, when I look at trying to go comparisons against back and forth, my only issue with South Carolina is they have had an issue, even though they have 4 players in double digits. Overall, as a team, they're not shooting that great. Their field goal percentage is below 40%. They got to be able to figure that out, especially against the Rams squad that's shooting almost close to 55% from the field. If that disparity remains the same, Colorado's going to run away with this game, and it's not going to be one of those cardiac wins or losses for South Carolina like they've seen so far this season.
Yeah, well, they did drill 10 3-pointers in Clemson game. So that's a positive thing. They're not taking a lot of really good high percentage shots, so I think that skews the percent a little bit. They did make up a 7-point halftime deficit, so again, that's another positive deal. PJ Hall, who had been out injured for the end of last year, played his first game of the year. He looked really good against Clemson. He had 15 points, 5 boards, a block, and a steal. That adds another weapon, if you will, for the Gamecocks. On the offensive end, he's a pretty good defensive player as well. But I'm going with Colorado State here. In fact, I'll go out on the thing and say Colorado State wins the Charleston Classic. I really, really think that they are a team that people are going to look back, over the weekend as you get into the second round and the championship bracket and say, wow, where did these guys come from? So I'm going with Colorado State in this one. That's not a knock on South Carolina. They found a way to get, the wins, especially that nail biter against Clemson. But I think Colorado State wins pretty convincingly here.
All right, and that one is going to be at 5:00 Eastern. Well, that's the scheduled tip-off. If any of these games go to overtime, like we saw in the State Farm Champions Classic, it went to double overtime, that tip-off will be moved to the right. On the scheduled tip-off for the final game in this last one, we have Davidson taking on Charleston, the hometown team here, 3-0 against 2-1 Charleston. 7:00 on ESPNU is where this nightcap's going to be. When you think of Davidson, if you've paid attention to NBA for the past decade and a half, you always think about Curry, right? Well, this team is a lot better than I wouldn't say a lot better as the past, but this team is a lot more than just the historic of Steph Curry, if you will. Foster Loyer has done some fantastic things with this squad, almost averaging 30 points per game, I mean, shooting almost 50% from the field. Davidson looks really good. And, we are talking one of the conferences that you and I really like to follow is the Atlantic 10. I
10.
grew up in Western New York, so I'm a St. Bonaventure fan. You love Duquesne. We both thought St. Louis was going to be a front runner in this conference. And obviously Dayton is ranked, even though they did already get a loss this season. But Davidson, I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. We had them ranked pretty low in our preseason rankings. I think that might be one that we get laughed at once the season's over, Steve.
I agree. And the more I dug into that, I guess I put more into the coaching change than perhaps I should have. But what I found really interesting is that Matt McCullough, picking up for his dad, Bob, he's a big analytics guy. So he stresses like KenPom ratings and efficiency markers, things like that. He's not afraid to have his team shoot threes. He's not afraid to incorporate some of the analytical strategies into how he wants this team to play. It certainly would be a huge change from what his dad Bob did, but I think that's a good thing for Davidson. Davidson has some great athletes. I mean, I think they're hitting at 46 or 47% from downtown. They're shooting 86% from the free throw line. So some of these fundamentals that KenPom actually sort of brings to the forefront more. That's the one thing I will say about KenPom ratings is I think they take fundamental skills and they kind of shine a spotlight on them a little bit more than a typical box score would. So this could be a really interesting approach for Davidson as they attack the A-10 schedule. They have to attack College of Charleston first,
right?
Mind you, and College of Charleston, and I'll let you get your points in on College of Charleston in a second. The thing that amazes me about this school is that in the summer of 2021, they literally had 2 scholarship players. They had lost so many players to graduation and through the transfer portal. They had 2 scholarship players.
Wow.
Yet somehow, Pat Kelsey put together a team. They won 17 games. They really had UNC Wilmington on the ropes in the conference tournament, and again, the Colonials doesn't have, top 20, a lot of top 25 teams sprinkled in, but it's a very competitive conference top to bottom. So I think that all of their freshmen that got their experience, especially the freshman guards, I think that is going to pay huge dividends for College of Charleston. Keep an eye on Ben Burnham. He is a human highlight reel guy. He really is. And he had a coming out party against North Carolina last year that was really impressive. In fact, he was even on ESPN. Yeah, he had 2 of his dunks against North Carolina when they played last year were on the ESPN top 10 plays of the week. So he's a special player.
Yeah, and when you think of this Charleston squad, I know they're 2-1, but you might as well act as this is a 2 teams of unbeaten, because the loss that Charleston had was to number 1 overall North Carolina, 102-86. They had a great game against Chattanooga, tournament team last year. They won in overtime against Richmond, and we know Richmond's a good team, another Atlantic 10. Well, now can they get another victory against another Atlantic 10 team who's on the rise in Davidson? I think that this is going to be a really close game. Vegas thinks so as well. They're only given a 1-point favorite to the College of Charleston. Davidson, though, when I look at this squad with Davidson, and I look at really the biggest thing that I'm looking at right off the bat is Lawyer. And I see that points per game at almost 30. And I'm like, wow, he must have all the offensive production. No, not at all.
No.
There are still 3 other players who are averaging double digits for this team. This Davidson team can score. They have offense production and they have more rebounds per game than Charleston does. And that's the 2 things that I really pay attention to initially before I really dive deep into who I think can win this game. But just seeing how much of offensive production we've seen from Davidson so far this season, with that win against VMI, that huge double overtime win against Wright State. You really want to get a good idea of this Davidson team, go watch that game against Wright State. That was the game that really shows their true identity. I think we're going to get a more taste of that in this game. I think we're going to be a lot closer to one of those Davidson Wright State games. And this one, I think it's going to be very close. Wouldn't be surprised if the nightcap goes to overtime. I think this is close, but I'm going to lean towards Davidson. I know that's bad juju to do against the hometown team, but Davidson just looks really good. You think Colorado State can be the team that can run this whole tournament? I think it's Davidson.
And again, a terrific observation with Davidson. I think I'm looking at this game a little more sentimentally. And as those of you that have watched a lot of our clips throughout the basketball season so far will know, we're not X and O guys. And I mean, Christian, you're a lot more versed in the Ken Palm ratings than I am. But there are two guys on College of Charleston from West Liberty State, which is a Division II powerhouse that plays, probably 20, 30 minutes here from where I live here in Pittsburgh. Dalton Bolin had a great second game of the season, put up 16 points. He is a hard-nosed guard, tough defender. You just hate to play against him because you're either going to be exhausted or you're going to be black and blue at the end of the day. And his West Liberty teammate, Pat Robinson III, has transferred in as a fifth-year graduate student. Yeah, he was an Division II All-American at West Liberty State. He scored well over 2,000 points. He's actually the sixth man so far, but I'd imagine he's going to eventually get starters minutes. But even as a sixth man, he's averaging in double figures. So for me, it's another joy to watch these two guys play at another step level. So I'm going to go sentimentally with College of Charleston. But you're right on, Christian. Davidson, if it's not Colorado State, it's probably going to be Davidson. As much as I like Virginia Tech, I think it's either going to be Davidson or it's going to be Colorado State.
Speaking of those transfers, they are second and third on the team in scoring, only behind Ryan Smith, the second-year player that's been with Charlotte for both years, who's averaging 18.7 points a game. This nightcap is scheduled for 7 p.m. tip-off on Thursday night. That'll round out the Shriners Classic for the first round. We will see the winners bracket on Friday. We'll see how that goes. It should be an interesting game, interesting tournament throughout the weekend. I'm looking forward to paying attention to this one. I'm going to be pretty glued to this one. It's right off the bat, starting in the early morning. Steve, I know you are too. We've even moved some of our recording so we can get that figured out.
Yes.
So yeah, really looking forward to that one. Again, catch the Shriners Children's Charleston Classic on Thursday all day. It's a great program. It's for a great charity, and it's going to be some good basketball.